and this is the Laura Flanders Show, a TV and radio program that shines a light on the solutions of tomorrow today. We report on the people and movements driving systemic change from the worlds of politics, arts, and entrepreneurship. Welcome. Community development. It's a puzzle. Nowhere we can think of has done it perfectly. Choose any city and you'll find issues. But one thing's for sure, the people who live in a place are the ones most keenly aware of what's needed there, and yet they are usually the ones with the least decision-making power about how their communities develop and change. Especially when they're poor or people of color. Majora Carter grew up and came of age in the 1970s in the South Bronx in New York, one of this country's toughest places at one of its toughest times. Since then, her neighborhood's seen billions of dollars of investment from all the usual sources, but very little of that has lifted up the people who live in her neighborhood. More often, it's displaced them or cast them as a problem to be fixed. Majora Carter long ago waded into this fray, deciding not to leave, but to stay and to do development differently. A self-described, quote, chick from the hood with zero experience in real estate, over the last 30 years, she's led a fight against a proposed waste management facility, spearheaded the creation of a new riverfront park. She started her own consulting firm, received a MacArthur Genius Award and a Peabody for her podcast, and in 2017, she and her husband launched the Boogie Down Grind Cafe, a hip-hop-themed cafe in Hunts Point, the Bronx, that survived and even thrived during COVID with a bit of help from Beyoncé. Her book, Reclaiming Your Community, You Don't Have to Move Out of Your Neighborhood to Live in a Better One, is just out from Berrett-Koehler. Majora Carter, welcome to the program. I'm glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Congratulations on the book and so much more. We're going to get into all of it. But we have to start where I think probably our audience last saw the Bronx, which was in news footage of a fire just this January. Tragic. Killed, I think, 17 people, 8 kids. Years since 1977 when the Bronx was said to be burning. Well, I anyway felt both sad and furious that this was still friggin' happening after all this time and all this money and all this awareness. You want to just share what was going through your mind?
Look, my heart went out to the people that were there. And, and just knowing the little that I knew about, some of the buildings up there wasn't the best. But the bottom line is we've got a lot of those buildings, right? And that in and of itself should tell us something about what's the kind of quality of life we expect people in communities like the South Bronx to be living in. And is that the best we can do? The answer for that would be no. There is something in between, gentrification that displaces us and poverty level economic maintenance, as evidenced by like the quality of some of those buildings that we still have in this borough. And to me, it's talent retention, making sure that we've got the tools to redefine and redevelop a future that we want to be in.
Did you grow up thinking that you would stay there?
No, of course not. I was planning my escape when I hit 7 years old, when at the beginning of the summer, I watched both buildings at either end of my block burn down. And at the end of the summer, my brother was killed, and because of the gang violence here. And I was like, I'm out. Like, I'm gonna use education and to get out. And I did. But what we've been seeing, especially over the past several years, are the talent within our community, all those strivers, the ones that are told and are expected to kind of move out once they make it, are staying here, opening up businesses and being a part of the culture that is a part of our community. They are totally dismissing this idea that the nonprofit industrial complex places on us, that poverty is a cultural attribute and neighborhood preservation is basically what's done in terms of development in places like this, that essentially says, well, this is what this community is. Again, inequality is assumed. So we're not going to set up the conditions for the talented ones to stay. We're going to make sure that they get out of here. Yeah. And that's that.
I mean, if you can still have buildings burning, given how many billions you write have been poured into the South Bronx, right, where is that money gone?
Billions of philanthropic and government dollars go into certain neighborhoods, but, they'll go to things like very highly subsidized affordable housing, where there's homeless shelters and for housing for very low income goes there. Pharmacies and healthcare, the lifestyle illnesses that are being also paid to treat those kind of conditions, from diabetes and, heart conditions, as opposed to like really treating, the action. They sort of treat the symptoms as opposed to the causes of what's actually happening in those communities.
You have a problem with pharmacies and community centers?
When it's the major way for folks for billions of dollars of economic activity to come into a community that's basically not there to support people's economic trajectory. Yeah, I do have a problem with it when it's banking on, the fact that the case that there's more opportunities for the people that are providing those services versus the people who are actually getting them, and we're not seeing any improvement in health outcomes or educational attainment or anything like that in those communities because we continue to concentrate poverty there. Yeah, I have an issue with that.
So really, there's no trajectory in mind. There's fixing people in place in mind. And that's what you write about. And that's what you say that you felt in those times when you were thinking about coming or going from the Bronx. Talk about what got you to stay, what committed you to the place, and what you love about it.
Well, I wasn't trying to come back to the Bronx, but I had, started my graduate program at NYU, and I needed a cheap place to stay. And the cheapest place was my old bedroom at my parents' house, period. And but once I got here, I got connected to this amazing young man who had actually started a community center, actually an arts program in the community. And it really, I had no idea there were that many creative and artist folks like in the South Bronx. And I was one of them. So I was just like, oh my gosh. And so that kind of made me want to stay. And because suddenly I found a tribe. But then, I realized that the city was planning on building a huge waste facility on our waterfront. And we had already handled an enormous amount of waste services and other types of, noxious, environmentally burdensome places. That's when I realized, like, all the arts and creativity in the world is not going to save us. I was struck with the really harsh realization that this happened because was happening to our community because we happen to be poor people of color and thus politically vulnerable. And I was like, I can pretend I don't see that and just move on, or I can be a part of the change I wanted to see in my own community.
Now, it hasn't been easy, and you write about how it hasn't been easy, because you have been trying to sort of spearhead a different path. Mm-hmm. And you got in particular trouble using the word self-gentrification, which wasn't your term in the first place, but got you into trouble. Can you talk about why and how you think about that term today? Yeah,
I mean, I think it was just the gentrification part, that people, it's just a trigger word for folks, even though self-gentrification, many that got it were just like, oh my gosh, that makes perfect sense. Why do we have to wait for the neighborhood to have folks come from outside the neighborhood to get better? Why can't we enjoy what's here? It's like, yeah, I want a better neighborhood. Yeah, like here. And so, but then there were definitely others who were like, oh, she's just gentrifying it. And I'm like, no. And it was fascinating because I think some people just heard gentrification and that was it, but we don't even use it anymore because it's just too much. And it just gets in the way.
Well, so to come back to the idea of reclaiming a community, you don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. Let's just dwell here for a little bit because it's complicated. Yeah. And I've been in the last few years, I think since we last saw each other, to a lot of places that were wrestling with this, whether it was New Orleans after Katrina, where they said, this isn't recovery, what we're seeing here, it's removal of the people who've lived here. Or Baltimore, where you saw, a rebellion after a police killing really try to raise the issues of development in a community.
Yeah.
And I remember somebody saying to us on the show, it's not that we don't want development here. We just want to have a piece of it, a part in it, some say.
Totally.
So how do you facilitate that say when government could say, well, we have community boards, we have surveys, people just don't show up to the meetings?
Well, no, that's nothing. I mean, I would add what they want is equity, period, as in the money, like not the equity the way progressives talk about it, because that doesn't create wealth for anybody. The problem is that we've got this huge wealth gap, based on the fact that there were entitlement programs, starting from the 1600s for white folks in this country that people of color didn't get straight up. So it's real easy, to say, and I hear this a lot, like, oh, there's, we want to hear your input into development. It's like, no, how about you help set us the access to capital so that we can actually do it. I mean, I find it so crazy. Let's say that there's an opportunity here for people to think about things like why do we it's made it so possible for folks that did have access at homes, through really hard times. And why is it so easy for predatory speculators to come in and pick that off of people, right? Because many times people don't really understand the value of their own property. That's one thing that we are actively trying to do. And it's a part of it is just we often we don't often, no one's letting it happen. But I think if you think about it, the way that predatory speculators have actually created, we're just like a piece, communities like ours are literally, we're like a little line item on their spreadsheets.
So having persuaded people who live in the community that they're worth nothing, their property's worth nothing, because look, this is how it gets treated. Then you come in and say, I'll give you nothing for it. And that'll seem like something. But the developers do have a plan, and they do see value in it.
Absolutely have a plan. So to the little old lady, who lives in a neighborhood that's a low status community and who's been watching it not get any better. So when someone shows up at her door and says, I can buy your house for cash, she's like, in this old crappy neighborhood? Okay, I'll take it. I'll move back to the islands or wherever. And, but we don't, because I think that's one of the problems that we have, that we're not supporting our own communities to actually be able to own. And instead we're talking about, they just need another program, or maybe they'll provide some input into another developer who comes here. No. And that's why the wealth gap is as large as it is, and why it will keep growing unless we're actually addressing this.
This is the Laura Flanders Show. I'm Laura. My guest is South Bronx native Majora Carter, an urban revitalization strategist, real estate developer, and MacArthur Fellow and Peabody Award-winning broadcaster. She's just written a book, Reclaiming Your Community. You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one, which describes, among other ventures, how she and her husband started the Boogie Down Grind, a hip-hop themed cafe in Hunts Point, which mid-pandemic received some much-needed support from Beyoncé's Be Good Foundation. Now it's hosting poetry slams and music shows, reminding locals of the talent that the Bronx is famous for. To see the grind in action, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or watch The Laura Flanders Show on public TV. All the information is at our website, lauraflanders.org, which is also where you can sign up for our weekly newsletter to receive the heads up on our web exclusives, live events, my commentaries, and my full uncut interview with this week's guest, Majora Carter. The full uncut conversation with last week's guest, Princeton professor and author Imani Perry, about her book South to America, A Journey Below the Mason-Dixon to Understand the Soul of a Nation, is available free to all on our site right now. Next, I ask Majora about what government can do to prevent residents from being priced out of their neighborhoods. Her answer is interesting. But first, here's We Could Be Gone by Rebel Diaz and Tef Poe from their Multiply Volume 1 collection. And that's another video you can see at our website, Ferguson to Detroit, Community Building from the Barbershop to the Polls. My conversation with Tef Poe in his barbershop in our archives, right there at Laura Flanders. southflanders.org. But first, here's We Could Be Gone.
Yeah, we see it in the evening news. Even seen it so much, we tend to get it confused. A nigga used for propaganda. Panda, panda, panda. With all these problems, no answers. Back to staying alive. We ain't the biggest threat to our lives. It's the conditions that thrive. When you're left with the crumbs of the pie. Water with lead that runs in the pipes. No money for water, heat, or the lights. Or a roof over your head at night. Now that's violence. Close your neighborhood school, that's violence. But the news say we wildin'. I invite you to check the perspective.
We've got a new administration coming in the city with Mayor Eric Adams. We have a governor running for re-election, Kathy Hochul, in the state. What tools do government agencies have at their disposal to do the kind of work that you're talking about?
You know, the same way that if you commit or accused of committing a crime, then you get, if you don't have access to counsel, the government will provide you with one. 6-figure real estate deals go down in communities like the South Bronx every other day. When predatory speculators show up at the homes of people, that don't really understand their asset or how to use it, and basically cut a deal that is often for far less than what that house is worth. And they could actually use the equity in that house to do all sorts of things. But instead, our government all over this country, locally, everywhere, just lets those kind of deals go past the Department of Finance with nobody says a word about the fact that literally no one says, like, are you sure you know what's happening here? Like that literally this asset that you're selling for far less than it's worth, because we could see some of the tax records that some of the sales that have happened around here. Do you know that this is what it's worth, or something like that, just so to let people know? But instead, they just pass muster. They just go right away. And, essentially what happens is that family's asset is just lost.
So a public real estate defender.
Yeah. So a public real estate defender. I love that. I'm totally going to write that down. That's shorter and better.
What about financial institutions? What exist and what do you need?
I do think that if there was more opportunities for the, for banks to kind of look more, I think, deeply at like what creates what's a good risk, then they would see that there's like the same way that Grameen International actually looked at alternative ways of assessing someone's risk and their ability to pay back something. That's, I think, is going to be really interesting to support people as they start thinking about asset, development for their own projects. And so that's really good.
What about that question of self-perception, of culture, of talent in a place? Because it doesn't feature anywhere on anybody's application form, the talent that's in their family, in their bones, in their community.
What we're trying to do is help people see that talent was actually nurtured in a community like ours. And it would be amazing if we could actually take it back and work to create more opportunities for us to benefit from their talent, and also for others to see the future of others that look just like them, doing this kind of work. So I think that's what's super important, about it as well.
So that takes us to the Boogie Down Grind. Talk about it. Where'd the idea come from?
As an early real estate developer, we just asked folks, what were they leaving the community for? To where do they spend their money? What were their hopes and dreams and aspirations for the kind of community they wanted to live in? And what came back were things like cafes and bars and restaurants and cool places to hang out. And so we acquired these 2 pretty cheap leases, from a landowner in the community, and we tried to get a coffee shop to come in. And, we won't say the name of the really big one, who's basically said, no, that market's too emerging. And so they didn't come, and we couldn't find anybody else to open up a cafe. So we decided to do it ourselves. And so, it was all our money that we, had saved up. But we decided to call it the Boogie Down Grind and really make it an homage, to the creativity and the talent that in the community that literally birthed hip hop. once we built this beautiful space and, and it came, and so we'd like literally plastered the walls with these like early hip hop albums. And it was just super fun and really kind of cool. And, and that's when the community, seemed to be enticed to stay, because there was someplace cool that literally spoke to them and that they were allowed to be their best selves. As a matter of fact, it was insisted upon. So there were people decided to come and do open mics and, credit repair workshops, book readings, music events. I mean, it was this tiny little space. Yeah. And it was really, really awesome to have something like that where folks were just sort of like, I didn't know we could do something like this in the neighborhood.
And then COVID hit.
And then COVID happened. We closed down like everybody else did for a while, but we got a grant from Beyoncé's foundation, and we decided to use it to make some outdoor seating. We literally like hung, artists' work, from between a lamppost and a tree. And, it was an outdoor, exhibition like every other day. We put a microphone on the corner and folks would come and do all their artistic things. It was truly amazing. And it was so beautiful, because one of the things that makes me super happy about that was that, people were just like coming up to us and saying things like, I haven't heard that much joy on that street corner in years. And I was like, yeah, like y'all did that. I mean, we just made the space, but the community filled it, and their joy is what's overflowing out of it.
How do you address the fact that it's inevitable that developing a place develops the interest of outsiders in coming and mining what's there?
There will be folks coming in, but if we can kind of set the conditions so that the talent that's already there can also participate, then we have a community. We have a much more, economically diverse ecosystem that creates opportunities for people that are already there, who can then, be like, okay, yeah, we know this aforementioned, chain's here, but guess what? There's another one, that wants to do this.
So does that look like economic diversity requirements, regulations?
We don't need to necessarily create, another like legislative lane for that. What we really need are just opportunities for people within our own community to be a part of the ownership trajectory. Sometimes it's as simple as keeping the family's home within the family. And, and I could say that like, because my own family didn't keep my family home. And that's still like, it's so painful, to me. But the thing is, I think we've got an opportunity to sort of like create more of an understanding that if we just keep what we got, that's actually a good way to start the trajectory for many folks in our communities to build generational wealth locally.
So you're talking about a different model for community development. You're also talking about a different model of community investment, investment by community members in community facilities and enterprises and businesses. And one that you have kicked off is a project you're calling Bronxlandia. And it's in an old, beautiful, abandoned train station. What's your vision there?
It's going to be a $2 million redevelopment where we're taking this historic, Cass Gilbert designed rail station. It's the same one, the same architect that did the Woolworth buildings, one of my favorite buildings in the world. And so he did these little rail stations, yours truly actually acquired one a few years ago, and we're going to transform it into an event venue. And so it's going to, so I want it to be like the best music venue ever. And it's going to be, that's my prayer.
Who can be part of that? Who is part of that so far?
So the SEC did a really wonderful thing where they changed their regulations that allowed for just non-accredited investors, so that not only super wealthy rich people with lots of assets under their belt could invest in real estate and other types of business projects, but ones that were not, but who wanted the same kind of proportional rate of return for their money to be in those deals. So what we're doing is a part of our capital stack is definitely going to be, part of the, for a crowdfunding investment platform where we'll give an opportunity to folks, for as little as like about $250, have a stake, within the development of Bronxlandia.
We often ask on this program, what is it that leads you to believe, or not just believe, but was there ever a moment in your life where you felt that the changes you believe in are not just possible, but happening?
Gosh, I have so many experiences that remind me that things are changing and that they've always been right there, because we took the time to recognize that our community was filled with talented people. We just needed to give it a place to see itself. And because reclaiming it involves retaining the talent that's already there to improve their own surroundings and their own economic future, because there's always been value in our communities. And we know that we could and should aspire to something that's economically and emotionally and spiritually meaningful to ourselves. We just have to give ourselves the opportunity to do that.
Capital, not charity. That's what it comes down to. People under pressure need help to preserve the assets that they have and a leg up to give them a fighting chance to make more, especially coming out of a global crisis. It's good for the people. It's good for the country. That was the thinking coming out of World War II when the GI Bill passed with bipartisan support in 1946. It offered free education and low-cost housing loans as well as unemployment supports to millions of returning GIs, and millions took advantage, opening up for them a doorway to the middle class for them and their families. But African Americans didn't benefit so much. For them, Southern colleges were entirely barred. Education was still beyond reach for many who had to work. And housing, well, the market was redlined. Financial institutions were still ruled by Jim Crow. In New York and New Jersey, of the 67,000 mortgages backed by the GI Bill, only 100 went to people of color. The GI Bill, as it turns out, did more to exacerbate racial disparities than shrink them. But that doesn't mean we can't do it again. Do it right this time. People often compare the pandemic to a war, so how about it? And perhaps add hazard pay and job protections for those whose communities have fought the hardest and suffered the most. It's something to think about.
For more information on this week's guest, go to patreon.com/The LF Show. You'll find a suggested reading list and additional related episodes to explore from our archives. That's also where you can find an invitation to watch the premiere of this week's episode on our YouTube channel at 11:30 Sundays. All the details are at patreon.com/The LF Show. And don't forget, your support makes it possible for this show to remain free. No commercials, no ads. Available to millions on public television, community radio, and as a podcast. Our Patreon partners receive early access to uncut interviews, including my entire uncut conversation with last week's guest Imani Perry about her book, South to America. And coming up, the entire uncut with Majora Carter. Join our fabulous Patreon partners by committing to a monthly contribution of $3, $5, or $11 a month. Go to patreon.com/The LF Show and partner with us today. Thanks for listening. Stay kind. Stay curious. Till the next time, I'm Laura.